Well, I guess we're up and running here. Let me double check on a few things. Yeah, that looks good. I think we're there. I sure hope so. I've tried to adjust the camera a little bit for today. I wasn't planning on doing this today, but I got a request. Roosevelt does a good job for me, and looking at all the information in the chat, apparently there were some questions about Israel, the state of Israel, the idea of the temple and the third temple, and a couple of other things. And so I'm going to talk about that first. Hello, everyone, as you come in. And I'll probably disappoint some of you because it's not going to be as it's not going to solve the problem, I guess is what the point is. Because this thing has so many parts to it and so many disagreements across not just the Jewish spectrum, but also Christian as well. A lot of different viewpoints. But I'll give you my take on it, and you can take it for what it's worth if you like. Hello, Roosevelt. Nice to see you. By the way, if Liza Jean comes in, would you let her know that I have a message for her? I don't have a way to get a hold of her, Roosevelt. So if you see her come on, just let her know. I'm trying. Maybe she can, if she has Twitter, she could DM me. I think she used to. I don't know if she does anymore. But since I'm going to be yakking my head off here, we will get to the chat a little later. I'm going to do a little Q&A. I think I owe it to you. I have some things to do later tonight, so I needed to do this a little earlier. I think right now is probably a good time. We'll see. Okay. So as you can tell from the title here, welcome again as you come in. As you can tell from oh, by the way, I didn't bring my regular studio lighting in. I just wanted to set this up real quick because I'm not using a board to write on, so the lighting doesn't have to be perfect. And so I'm probably going to look a little washed out, a little yellow because of the LED light, but that's okay. I'm not really concerned about it. I could have changed the exposure on the camera, but I'm not that vain. Okay, so it's really, we can just get right down to it. Okay, so the question is, let's talk about Israel first. And of course, if you've read the Bible, if you've looked at history, Israel had a lot of problems. It broke up. You had the 10 tribes in the north called Israel, and then you had the south tribes in the land of Judea there, land of Judah. And then the 10 tribes were taken away in a war by the Assyrians and lost forever, supposedly. That's not entirely true. A lot of them were still left in the area, and they showed up later in history. In my book, The Crimson Thread, talks about some of that. And again, for those of you who like to read it, it's out of print, but you can, Roosevelt might be kind enough to put up the link here to the website that is up there with my manuscript on it. It's not the book proof. It's just the manuscript before it went to book proof. So, but you can at least read it. So the history was really crazy. I mean, for God's people, they just had tons of problems, and they caused tons of problems. And I'm talking in generalities here because it's so convoluted and so complicated that it just, to do it justice would take a lot longer than we have time here. So like I said, I'm kind of giving you my take on the whole thing. So basically the northern 10 tribes disappeared, and they were diffused throughout the diaspora. That means the Gentile nations. And they pretty much, by and large, lost their identity. Not entirely, because if you believe the Bible and the scriptures, God would plant his law in their hearts and in their minds, and so there would be a remnant of them. And the gathering in the latter days talks about a remnant of those lost 10 tribes being gathered back together. And of course it talks about the Jews returning to their homeland. But there is disagreement even amongst the Jews on this subject, and that's why I'm kind of reticent to really go here, because it really isn't resolvable. It really, really isn't. But I think most people that follow me know that although I consider the state of Israel, that it has a right to exist, I also recognize that it's not the Israel that's talked about in the Bible, despite the way Christians like to view it that way, and some Jews. Not all of them, by the way. So primarily the people that are in in the state of Israel right now are that they claim to be Jews. Whether or not they are, that's another subject we could get into, but I'm going to avoid that today. And the state of Israel is not doing what the gathered Israel or even the gathered Jews would do. Now they are trying to, a certain group of them are trying to build the third temple. You probably know about that, and I'm going to discuss it in a few minutes. But they don't obey any of God's laws. I mean, absolutely none of them. This last whole situation with the procedure, for instance, totally forbidden in Jewish, in Israelite law. Also, the situation with the way they view different sexual orientations and things like that. And then also the ones that they prohibit. It's really interesting. They don't prohibit the bad ones. I don't want to get into too much detail. I just want to tell you that it doesn't have the fruits of the Israel that God would be concerned with in the last days. You've heard the old statement that if you have 3 Jews gathered together, you'll have 5 opinions. Well, that really goes for the establishment of the state of Israel and for any concept of building the third temple. You basically have 3 Jewish groups. There are more, but there are basically 3, and the others kind of fall in one of these 3. You have the conservative group, you have the Orthodox group, and you have the Reform group. The Orthodox, even amongst the Orthodox, there are only a few in there who really think that the state of Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. They don't believe that by and large because of the dispersion that happened back 2,000 years ago and even before. They believe that dispersion was God's will and that they're supposed to be out amongst the nations. There are groups of Orthodox Jews, for instance, the Lubavitchers, that believe that they can build a third temple, that the state of Israel is in fact God's Israel, and that God's going to use it. And that's probably true, but not in the way that it would normally be considered. So you have that group, and of course some of the Orthodox are pushing for a third temple to be built. Not many, but there are a group of them, a significant number that are. In the Reform group, they don't give a crap about the third temple. They do want Israel to be there by and large. They think they're a group that would think that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are the same thing, which of course if you follow me, I do not say that that's the case, quite the opposite. And I could probably talk more about them, but I'll just leave it at that. And then the conservative group is kind of in between the Orthodox and the Reform. And some of them will believe that, well, most of them think that the state of Israel is a good thing and that it should be there. I'm not so sure they think like the Orthodox at all, that God's in control there. I'm not sure they think that way. It depends on who you're talking to. But as far as the third temple is concerned, they could take it or leave it. Okay? That's kind of where they are. Well, then you go over to the Christian side, and there are Christians that want to support Israel, come hell or high water. It's God's thing there. He did it. They forget about the Balfour Declaration and about the Rothschilds setting it up and all of that. They consider anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism to be the same thing. It's do or die for Israel at all costs, the state of Israel as it exists today, the current state of Israel. You have those people, and that they insist also that a third temple is going to be built because the scriptures say so. No, I don't look at it that way. I don't think that the scriptures say anything about a third temple. That's primarily Talmudic Rabbinic Judaism that came up with that, and interpretations based on some real problematic scriptures about the last days. One of them, of course, being in Thessalonians, which is a New Testament scripture, but there are also some in Jeremiah and Isaiah and others. But the way they're written, it's really not lending to the idea of a third temple in the same manner as the first and second temple. And I will read something to you here. I'm not going to read all of these scriptures. It's like I said, it's so convoluted, it would be way too much for us to handle here. So basically the bottom line is you also have Christians who believe that Israel, the state of Israel is God's work, that that they're going to have a third temple built there. And then you have Christians that don't believe that believe that Israel is the scattered Christian religion, basically, the different Christians in particularly in Europe and the United States and America, that they're actually the lost Israelites, and they may not even think that, but the point is that they don't give a lot of credence to Israel, and they certainly don't give a lot of credence to the third temple. And then you have a group like the Mormons. They're kind of in between. They're building their own temples, which, by the way, isn't really a bad thing. I think anybody who follows me, you'll read it in my book, for instance. There was the temple, Herod's temple, the second temple there in Jerusalem. But the last high priest known to history, Ananias, left Judea and went to On Egypt and built a temple there, and they did all the same things there in On Egypt. So multiple temples can still happen, even though everybody thinks it has to be in Jerusalem. So my point in all this is, it almost depends on who you talk to. And even scripturally, you can justify just about any position. And scripturally, you can destroy just about any position. So we're not going to resolve anything here today. I'll just give you some ideas on how to view it, and maybe you can sift through it yourself if you feel like it. I will give you my opinion, and that's really all it is. I can't give you a totally fact-based estimate or history, because it's just so crazy. For instance, the Levitical high priests. The entire genealogy has basically been lost. People claim genealogy in these different tribes, particularly in the Udite tribe and in the Levite tribe, and they really can't prove it. Okay, they've done those. What is it? Anyway, those DNA tests and stuff like that, and they say, yeah, we're the same Jews that were there in the first century. Well, a lot of the so-called Jews that were there in the first century weren't Jews at all. They were Edomite Arabs, Herodians, and converts and stuff. So all of that's not provable at all. Actually, the genealogy was lost originally during the Babylonian captivity, which was long before even the Seleucids conquered the area. The Greeks and the Maccabee situation, all that happened long before all that. So a lot of this is just nationalism, declared even if there's really no proof of it. So that's kind of where it is. In my estimation, this is how I look at it. As I've said, I don't have a problem with the state of Israel existing. I do have a problem with them coming in 1947 and kicking the people out of the land who were there already. You make a claim that's 2,000 years old or 3,000 years old or 4,000 years old, then nobody deserves to be living on any land because somebody else owned it before them. I mean, it's really ridiculous. Even to base it on the Bible and say the Bible tells us that this is their homeland. Well, yeah. So let me give you a little more history so that you can kind of find out, why I look at things this way. First of all, again, the state of Israel is it's just a nationalist state. It really has nothing to do with Israelite history or tradition, culture, or spiritual system. It really doesn't. Okay, it's really almost sectarian, actually. It's a really poor example of a godly state, because it isn't one. Okay. Secondly, as far as the third temple is concerned, as I've already hinted at, I don't see any really concrete scriptural evidence that a third temple is going to be built. I'm not saying it won't be, because there are those Jews who want this third temple built, and there are things that they are doing to try to make that happen. Trump moving the American embassy to Jerusalem was a step towards that, if you understand the politics of what was going on there. There's been a lot of fighting over the Temple Mount and things like that, but now there's been a movement that possibly the actual temple may be able to move to a slightly other location, or they might have a movable temple they're using. Let me give you a little background on that. It started with the Mishkan. The Mishkan, of course, is the tabernacle that Moses built under directions, from God, how to set it out. And it was a movable tabernacle, kind of a temple, kind of that. And then they created the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron Habrit. And of course, the history of that. And then the tabernacle was used to house the Ark of the Covenant. Well, the Ark of the Covenant was actually being guarded and taken care of by the Moshite priests. Those were the descendants of Moses. He was a Levite, of course, so he had a right to the priesthood. He was certainly God's spokesman as far as the Bible is concerned. The Torah, for instance, Genesis in particular, and Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, all that, Numbers. And it was his descendants, the Moshite priests, Levitical priests, who actually took care of the Ark of the Covenant. That's who took care of it. And its resting place became Shiloh, not Jerusalem initially. It was rested in Shiloh, and because of that, it wasn't really well protected, but it was God's Ark, so they just kind of took care of things. It was removed a couple of times by the Philistines, etc. Some things happened there, but basically it always ended up back in Shiloh. Well, why is that important? Well, it goes back to the blessing of Jacob, Israel, onto his son Judah, where he said that the scepter shall not depart from Judah, neither a lawgiver between his feet, until Shiloh comes. Well, Shiloh is Ephraim. That's where Shiloh is. It's in Ephraim, which also kind of gets into my book about why the Messiah that came 2,000 years ago was actually an Ephraimite, not a Judahite. I told you this gets really complicated. So the point is that the Ark of the Covenant was supposed to remain in Shiloh. Well, politics gets into religious things just as well. If you don't see that happening today with the 501c3, for instance, a lot of churches will follow that so they can keep that status rather than teaching the truth or standing up for principle. It was no different in ancient Israel. Just because it's written in the Bible doesn't mean it was God's will. Many times just the contrary. Well, that was the case here. So David becomes king. Whether he was historical or not, that's not the issue. We're taking it from the Bible story, okay? David becomes king, and he decides that he wants Judah, to rule as because it was Benjamin before, right? King Saul was a Benjamite. He wasn't a Judahite, so that was already weird that God brought a Benjamite in to be a king over Israel when it was supposed to be Judah. Saul was the first king. What's going on here? So when David becomes king, he wants to solidify his power, okay, over all of the tribes. So he decides to build Jerusalem. It was already there, but he expanded on it. And one of the things he did is he required that the Ark of the Covenant and the Mishkan being the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant that was inside of it, be moved to Jerusalem. And there he would build a temple to house the Ark of the Covenant. This was not really God's choice. Despite how you read it in the Bible, it really makes no sense. It was nothing more than a political move by David to solidify his power. Again, that's how I look at it historically and scripturally. You may come up with another idea. Certainly the Jews did, even as late as even around first century with people like James and Peter, James and John and all that. Which we talked about in the Eisenman series. But at any rate, so it was a political move, okay? But David wasn't permitted to build the temple, whether it was God or one of the Levite priests that said, no, you've shed too much blood, you're not going to be able to do this, you're going to have to just get things ready, and your son Solomon's going to have to build it. And that's what happened. Solomon built the temple, and then from there, of course, the taxes that Solomon put on the people it was just horrendous. It was such a weighty thing that during that process, that's when the northern kingdoms, the 10 tribes, decided to split from Judah, and you then became the nation of Israel in the north and the nation of Judah in the south, and they were in contests between each other for a long time. Sometimes they'd get together and fight a common enemy. Sometimes they'd fight each other. Sometimes they'd make agreements, treaties with other nations that were opposed to the other side. I mean, it really got messy. So finally, what happens, and I'm giving you a quick history. Of course, the second well, first of all, 10 tribes up north were taken into captivity by the Assyrians, and then Judah was fighting, and of course they fought like the Pharaoh in Egypt and all this stuff. And finally, they also were defeated by the Babylonians, and the Ark of the Covenant disappeared. Okay, and the temple was destroyed and all that. So after this Babylonian captivity, the Persian king Cyrus, which is where the name Koresh comes from, because that's the actual name in Hebrew, he let Ezra and the priests there go back to Israel and rebuild the temple and start their nation again. And that's why today Trump was considered to be this Cyrus character by the Jews in Israel, and probably a lot of people in the United States as well. I mean, I thought that might be a possibility at first too, and then I realized some of the other things he was doing, and I realized it really wasn't going the way it was supposed to. There was a lot of deceit involved in that. And if you followed me, you know about the coins where Trump was put on it along with Netanyahu, and they were called the Sons of Light. You had the situation in the Golan Heights where they called it Trump Heights. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff that was going on. But at any rate, the bottom line is that this Koresh, this Persian king, allowed them to go rebuild a second temple, which still had some problems over the years. But that particular temple was in place when the Greeks came, Alexander the Great's generals, and they polluted the temple. This is where the idea of an abomination of desolation comes from. The Greek Antiochus Epiphanes put a Zeus statue in the temple, and that really is, there's a garbling from the Greek into the Hebrew. It really isn't called an abomination of desolation. It really has to do with the name of the statue in Greek going into Hebrew. But anyway, that's really where the first idea of this abomination of desolation came from, was what Antiochus Epiphanes did. And then the Maccabees, of course, came around. They fought off the Seleucids. You know, they rededicated the temple and started things up again. Went along for a few years. We're rebuilding the temple, getting it ready. Then the Romans came, okay, and they sacked the temple. They didn't steal anything. They basically just fought the Maccabees and took over, installed the Herods. That's where the Herodian dynasty came from. They were Edomite Arabs, not Jews. The Romans put them over the Jewish people, and Herod started to, his son actually, Herod Antipater, he didn't do it. It was Herod the Great that then started to rebuild the temple and upgrade it and remodel it. And of course, that's the one that the Romans destroyed in 70 AD. So at any rate, after that, of course, and the Romans also destroyed the temple in On, Egypt, the one that the high priest Ananias had built. So that's kind of the history, and it's all over the place. Of course, the Ark of the Covenant has never been found. The Mormons have a story about the golden plates, that Moroni, the angel Moroni, brought these plates that became the Book of Mormon to Joseph Smith, and that he translated them and all that. And instead of him being able to keep the plates, which is kind of an interesting story, the angel came and took them away again. What? I had a brother-in-law that was all excited. They saw a documentary about the plates of the Book of Mormon and the original golden plates, and they were all excited. And then they found out that the story then became, because they built it up, they have all this proof of this, and then the final part of the last part of the segment, I think it was on the History Channel, says, but in the end the angel came and took the plates again, so we don't have any proof. And they said, well, that's ridiculous. Well, the same thing about the Ark of the Covenant. Where is it? There are a lot of legends about it and all sorts of things, but it's really not around. Did God take it? Is it hidden in Ethiopia? We've had people claim that they've seen it and seen Jesus' blood on it. I can tell you it's not true. Okay, that just isn't a true story. That's hyping things up for fame and fortune. So anyway, that's a real brief history of the temple situation. Now, they've wanted to build this third temple. And there are some indications, for instance, in Thessalonians, where it says the man of sin will be revealed, and he'll be sitting in the temple of God, showing himself as if he is God. Well, is that a stone temple? Of course, some Christians will say, no, it's the temple of the body of Christ. I'm not certain that that's true either, 100%. I think arguments could be made either way. But the bottom line is that the Jews, in fact, put too much emphasis on the temple, and especially the sacrifices of the temple. As you've heard me talk about, and even though James the Apostle, Jesus' brother, was very much for cleansing out the temple in his day, the 60s CE, AD, and try to rededicate it so that they could do the original ordinances and some of the other things that they did in the temple, because there are some things that you have to have a temple for, and that's another story altogether. But even James had a lot of respect for the temple and rededicated it, and because he went to the Holy of Holies, the Herodian high priests killed him for that, stoned him to death. That's how he died. But he still promoted the idea of temple. He didn't want things to defile the temple. Now that gets convoluted as well because it doesn't quite fit with the other things that he was saying. But regardless, I want to read something to you. I talked a lot about his teaching, which came from his brother, Jesus, that the important things are righteousness and piety. That's what God looks at. You've heard me talk about it time and time again. I remember it because it's my initials, RP, at least in the English. Righteousness and piety. Righteousness being how you treat your fellow man, and piety being love and respect for God. Those are the things that matter. And that's what God was trying to teach the Israelites. And instead, they put so much emphasis on the sacrifices and the scapegoat and all of that, the atonement, that they didn't take the lesson that God wanted them to learn. Now people will say, well, what are you talking about, Roy? Well, I've already read to you in the last video, giving you some scriptures about God's preference that we do the sacrifice of a broken heart and a contrite spirit, that we do righteousness and piety. But let me read you Isaiah. I got to put my glasses on. The lighting in here is bad. I've been having to do this a lot lately. Is everybody okay? We're going along with this, by the way. If you need to go get a drink, I'll have a break here in a minute because we're going to have a Q&A where we can have some exchange of information. Yeah, these fires and stuff have just been bad. Okay, so I'm in Isaiah chapter 1. If you want to follow along, I really have used this a lot. I've had this Bible since high school. I think I've shown it to you before. I mean, it has tons of notes. I go through and everything is highlighted and referenced. I mean, I've really used this thing. I have another Bible that's a little better shape, but a lot better shape than this one. But this is my go-to because I've used it since I was, actually it was before high school. I've probably had this since junior high. Okay, so let's read Isaiah chapter 1, and we're going to concentrate down a little. I know that this isn't right to read the whole chapter, but you'll understand why I'm doing this here in just a minute, because if you apply chapter 1 of Isaiah to our situation today, it's almost identical. It's almost identical. Not just the United States, but the whole world, but certainly the United States. And that gets back into the idea of the dispersion of the 10 tribes and who God's really going to gather. The gathering, you notice I've talked about the importance of a deliverance and a refuge. Well, that has to do with God gathering together the remnant of Israel, the remnant of those who have his law written in their hearts and their minds, be they Christians, Jews, or whomever, because that's God's work, not man's. But let me go ahead and read this. Forgive me for doing this, but I just think you need to hear it, okay? And you should read it later. So let's get to it. Again, chapter 1 of Isaiah. The vision of Isaiah the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. With the help of, fallen angels, etc., etc. The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib, but Israel doth not know. My people doth not consider. Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel into anger. They are gone away backward. I quote that part of that verse all the time. In those days, they will go away backward. Why should ye be stricken any more? Ye will revolt more and more. The whole head is sick, and the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot even unto the head there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, neither mollified with ointment. Your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire, your land, listen to this, strangers devour it in your presence. What's happening right now? Your land, strangers devour it in your presence. You lose your birthright. They're giving it away. The people that lead this country are giving it away. And it is desolate, as overthrown by strangers. This is talking as much about us as it is the people in Isaiah's time. And the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in a vineyard, as a lodge in a garden of cucumbers, as a besieged city. Except the Lord of hosts had left unto us a very small remnant. We should have been as Sodom, and we should have been like unto Gomorrah. What is he talking about here? A group of people that continue to do righteousness and piety and have the law of God written in their hearts and minds. God will suffer a lot of evil even if a small group of people are doing his will. That's why Abraham, when he was negotiating with God on the plains of Mamre, by the way, Abraham prepared some meat for him, if you remember that. Kind of an interesting side note. But at any rate, Abraham negotiated him down to 10 people. If there could be 10 righteous found, God would not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and God agreed to that. Well, he knew there weren't 10 people. I think the evidence was stacked against Abraham, but that's okay. The point is those are Zadoks, holy men, in the real sense of the word. Sometimes they can be taken too far, as I believe the Essenes did in the first century under James. I think they went too far. They set up stakes that really were kind of absurd, actually, and my book explains that. But let's keep reading here. Hear the word of the Lord, ye rulers of Sodom. Give ear unto the law of our God, ye people of Gomorrah. He's talking about Jerusalem here, and we could apply it to our country as well. To what purpose is the multitude of your... This is where we get into the sacrifices. Remember, the Levitical law, they had all these things, but they had to do sacrifices. Even Abraham did a sacrifice, right? What was the purpose of the sacrifices? Well, Christians will say, well, it's to help us remember the sacrifice of Jesus. Well, it's actually more expansive than that. But let's just see what he says about the sacrifices, which are being done in the temple. So what is the use of a third temple when God talks like this? Listen to it. To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices unto me, saith the Lord? I am full of the burnt offerings of rams, and the fat of fed beasts, and I delight not in the blood of bullocks, or of lambs, or of he-goats. When ye come to appear before me, who hath required this at your hand to tread my courts? Well, now wait a minute. Didn't he say through Moses to do this in Leviticus? What's being told to us here? The Torah, the whole exit of Israel from Egypt, that whole story, the whole Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that whole story happened at the same time that Homer was writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. Did you know that? I've mentioned this before. This was a period of time when the consciousness of man was waking up and people were trying to explain it. Homer was doing it in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it wasn't just the Israelites and Moses in Egypt that were realizing that something was going on. There's an author by the name of Julian Jaynes that wrote a book that's called The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. It's in my bibliography in my book, The Crimson Thread. And it talks about this whole situation. It wasn't just in Israel that this was happening. It was happening worldwide. God was working with everybody at the time, not just the Jews, not just the Israelites. Okay, let's keep reading. When ye come to appear before me, who hath required this at your hand to tread my courts? Bring no more vain oblations. Incense is an abomination unto me. The new moons and the Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies, I cannot away with. It is iniquity, even the solemn meeting. Well, didn't God call all of them to do this? Why did he call it and then say that he's sick of it? Let's keep reading. Your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hateth. What? They are a trouble unto me. I am weary to bear them, to hear them, to bear them. Which was bear them, to bear them. And when ye spread forth your hands, I will hide mine eyes from you. Yea, when ye make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. Remember my little explanation of the consumption of blood, whether real or done in a I'm trying to be careful how I say this, in a pretend way. Even the pretension of drinking blood is not looked upon favorably by God. I talked about that before during one of my Eisenman presentations. So let's keep reading. Wash ye, make you clean, put away the evil of your doings from before mine eyes. Cease to do evil. These sacrifices don't mean anything. I'm trying to change your heart and your mind. I'm trying to put my law, I'm trying to put my attributes into you, and you've misunderstood the whole school program. Learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow. Does this sound like somebody else you know that might be preaching around 2,000 years ago? Come now. I talk about this one a lot too. I don't get into the hocus pocus stuff. I divide the Word of God, hopefully rightly. I make a mistake every once in a while, but I get down in the nitty gritty, and I don't always say that this is the ineffable, infallible Word of God. And this is the reason why. Listen to this. Come now, and let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. If ye be willing and obedient, ye shall eat the good of the land. No. Let's see. Are we going to be able to get into heaven on the coattails of somebody's going to make a sacrifice for us? Or is that person going to show us how to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow? If ye be willing and obedient, ye shall eat the good of the land. But if ye refuse and rebel, ye shall be devoured with a sword, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. Let me see how much further I want to go here. Let's see. I think that's probably good. You can read the rest of it. The point is, it looks like God, speaking through Isaiah, wasn't real happy with the temple sacrifices. They were doing them rather than learning what they were supposed to learn from that and then to do good. So, what am I saying about the third temple? I don't think there's supposed to be one. I think this is a Talmudic, rabbinic, even later Kabbalah. And remember, I use Kabbalah, but it's the earlier type along with the Echolot, which uses the Hebrew language itself to interpret the Hebrew language and the messages and to expand on them. It's not the hocus pocus stuff of Oliver Crowley or even of the Kabbalic sages of the medieval ages who went way down a weird road. Okay, I'm just saying it. Okay, I'm just saying it. So the third temple is something they look forward to. I don't really see any concrete evidence that God expects a third temple to be made. Christians will argue that they, as the body of Christ, as just using their vernacular, that they're the temple of God, and that's what it could mean when it says that the lawless one, the son of perdition, will show himself in the temple as God as if he is God. Well, we've got this whole AI thing working now, the mark of the beast, the GMI, which is placing nanotech, other things in it. I did a thing about graphene a little while ago. All right? And people are saying, well, there's no graphene in these. Yeah, there is. Oh, yeah, there is. All so that people will submit. And remember, I did a video, a live stream about submitting, obeying is a form of worship. That is worshiping the beast and the image of the beast. By submitting, you are worshiping. That's what it really means. So I gave you some other things about this, that God prefers the sacrifice of a broken heart and a contrite spirit to the sacrifices of animals and all that stuff. Let's read just a couple of them. I'll do Psalms. I read this one the other night, but let's read it again now. Psalms 51:17, where he says, "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart." Exactly what I said. "O God, thou wilt not despise." And there are others, and I'm not going to waste any more time going through that. I think I've made my point. But like I said, where you have three people gathered together, whether they Jews or Christians or something in between, you have three people gathered together on this subject, there are going to be 5, 6, 10, 20 opinions. Because it's so convoluted. You look at the biblical record, and it's a mess. And you look at the historical record, and it's not quite the same. I'm not saying there isn't historical proof of what happened in the Bible. I think there is. But it's not straightforward. You really have to be willing to expose yourself to a deep study and begging God for an understanding of understanding and wisdom. Because it's not just laid out in black and white, clean as a whistle. It really isn't. So my point again is, no, I don't think there's supposed to be a third temple. I think that's a distraction. If they do build one, and I do think they have a mobile tabernacle, a mobile mishkan right now, which may be underneath the temple in a chamber, underneath the Temple Mount in the chamber. The real temple should be in Shiloh, not in Jerusalem, in my estimation. If they were going to build one, that's where it should be. But then in the New Testament it says, God doesn't dwell in a temple of stone. He dwells in a temple of, the heart. Of course, I don't entirely trust Paul either, because he was at odds with the Essenes and the Messianic movement. So you had a war going on at this time. You can't really take either side and say either one was 100% right. In war, what's the first casualty? Truth. And it even happens with the pious ones. So let me read something about James here real quick, because I wanted to do this, which I thought you might find interesting. You know about the book, Robert Eisenman's book on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this is only one. He's written many, many books, and I've studied them all. I've studied the Dead Sea Scrolls myself. But I want to quote something out of here to you, for those of you who might be worrying that maybe James, and James had a problem. I've talked about that before, and we're not going to get into that in any great detail today. But I did want to read this to you. It's on page 212 of this book, if you've got it, to give you a little hope, because I do believe that Jesus was real. I do believe that the brother of James, Jesus, was real, but I don't believe, as Eisenman does, that if you find the historical James, you figured out who Jesus is. Whether his history has made it so that James is the real character and they created Jesus and put some of James' characteristics on him. That would be kind of most scholars' opinions of the matter. Eisenman's kind of in between. He's not sure, but he kind of leans towards that. I don't. I believe that it's exactly like they said. This guy was a real guy. Because of what James and the Essenes are doing, and because of what he says here. In the Pseudo-Clementines, I've talked about that before, you have the Pseudo-Clementine homilies and recognitions. And on page 212, Eisenman's talking about the Pseudo-Clementines. I want to read this to you. He's talking about the Temple Mount and the footstool imagery of Psalms 110. And this is a quote by Clement of what James was saying on the steps of the temple. This imagery, which is based on Daniel 7:13, it contains the great power language so important to later sectarian understanding of the Christ, is clearly that of the Redeemer Jesus coming in power on the clouds of heaven and the heavenly host. It is paralleled to some degree in James' speech on the temple steps in the pseudo-Clementine recognitions at this point as well. Now listen to this. Here James is pictured as giving the scriptural warrants for two comings. And this is evident in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well. I'm just telling you that up front, okay? I'm not going to read from there. I don't have them with me, but it is in there, okay? The first, let me go back here and say this again. Here James is pictured as giving the scriptural warrants for two comings. The first, more humble, having already transpired. James' discussion on the temple steps is in 60 CE, at least the mid-50s CE, so it's well after the crucifixion of Jesus. But the second, in glory, would be more supernatural and mighty. So the first one wasn't supernatural. James doesn't even talk about the virgin birth because there wasn't one. That wasn't the issue. It was a firstborn son, as I've explained ad infinitum. James and the Dead Sea Scrolls talk nothing about that. You think that would be big news, a virgin having a kid without, being married, that having the conjugal relationship, but no word of that at all. And there's really no word there's mention of the righteous one being slain, but the emphasis isn't on even the resurrection or on what happened on the cross. It's on righteousness and piety, and that he set the example of those two principles. So let me continue reading. But the second coming in glory, so we have a first coming in humble circumstances, then a second. But the second in glory would be more supernatural and mighty. That is, the Messiah coming on the clouds of heaven with the heavenly host, in which he would reign over those who believe in him and do everything he commanded. Doing. Not riding his coattails into heaven, but doing. But I thought you'd like to hear that James actually talked about the first coming being a humble origin. He was still entitled to the royal throne, but he suffered instead. He became the suffering servant of Isaiah 52:53, which Trump is trying to pretend to be. And then, of course, the second coming where he comes in glory. So there's still that to look forward to. There are arguments both ways. We're not supposed to, sit around and wait for that. We're supposed to be doing now. That's what we're supposed to be doing, because Jesus said, he was quoted as saying, greater things will you do than I have done, because I go to the Father. Greater things, you mean being crucified and being raised, resurrected, and we're going to do greater things? If we're doing righteousness and piety and we keep an eye single to God and stop bowing down to these demons in these political places and these governments, yes, I think so, because God's kingdom is a political kingdom. It's not some ethereal, spiritualized thing. It's going to be a reality. But we only obtain it if we really, really want it. Okay. I think I've covered the subject matter. Roosevelt, I don't know if I've done justice to what you wanted done here, according to the requests in the chat. But like I said, it's a very complicated subject, and I think basically what I've explained is that I don't think there's going to be a third temple, that the state of Israel is not God's chosen place where, the Jews might, if they can figure out who they really are, might gather there. And there might be some gathering elsewhere of those who have God's law written in their hearts and in their minds. In other words, his chosen group of people, and it's a remnant. The scriptures say it's a remnant. But it's a lot of people are going to get this. James even talks about in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or at least the righteous teacher talks about it, about the God-fearers being able to obtain salvation. Okay, and it's through righteousness and piety. Okay. I will go to chat. I've got my computer right here. This time it's not over here. I can actually watch the camera and you at the same time. So let's see if there's anything here that I can answer. The first one I see is Karen in Nevada. So there was no spirit-born virgin birth, conception via God's Holy Spirit. Not according to James. Not according to the Dead Sea Scrolls that were at that time. And my explanation of what virginity is, which we did yesterday and I did in the Eisenman series. No. The idea of the divinity of Christ was not pushed by James at all. Not in his epistle in the New Testament, not in his speeches in Acts, and certainly not in MMT, which is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or any of the others for that matter. No, he was a man who earned by his righteousness and piety. And I had a friend, an old sage, that actually sent me down this path many years ago of study, who said to me that Jesus Christ, and that wasn't his real name, again, as I've explained, that's a calling, that's a list of attributes that we're all supposed to obtain, seek for. Again, the law of God written in our hearts and minds, primarily based on the two pillars, righteousness and piety. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind and strength, as Jesus said. The first great commandment, that first pillar, which is piety. The second, righteousness, love thy neighbor as thyself. Upon these two are all the law and the prophets. The sacrifices, I did that so that you try to learn and you didn't take it. You thought that was the way to heaven. That's not the point, which I just read in Isaiah, which would then take away the necessity of a third temple. I'm probably not going to get into Masonry today. That's almost as convoluted and difficult to explain as the whole thing on Israel and the Third Temple. People don't understand the real history of what happened there and why the Masons became the enemy of the Pope. As they first started, I don't think that they had any intention of rebelling. It's when they found information in Jerusalem that contradicted the standard line of the Roman Church. But like every group that gets a little knowledge, they got corrupted over time and did become the enemy of Christianity because they associate Christianity with the Roman Church, which it really isn't. True Christianity isn't aligned only with the Roman Church, if at all. And I know I'm going to get some Roman Catholics upset about that, but I'm just stating it, okay, from my study and my understanding of things. Like I've already shown my point on that, on the whole virginity thing of Mary, okay? That doesn't stand up against scrutiny under any microscopic test. It just doesn't. All right. Denver Edward, and we can talk about this. He's saying it would take long to explain, but I think your Caesar Augustus 11 is right in the bullseye. In Romania, we have a lady that posts what she says are messages from the Holy Ghost, prophet. Well, yeah, I think God's speaking to a lot of people. It could very well be the case. He's opening up a lot of minds of those who have a sincere heart and want to do the right thing. Again, I fasted for 5 days several weeks back. I fasted for almost 3 last week. I can't say I've gotten any spiritual message about any of this. I've had to use my estimate of the situation from the information that's available to me from a lot of different sources. And I've mentioned them. Governor DeSantis, the military people that are getting their food and water ready, and they're apparently not a large group in the military, but it's quite extensive, expansive. The situation with what's going on in the WEF, the situations going on in the White House, the push for this entire GMI procedure to be forced on people in all sorts of ways. The latest one being, you're not going to get your federal money if you don't take part in this. I mean, there's all kinds of things. This is extortion. This is criminal conduct by nations and nations leaders. Why? Well, I think we know why, and I've already talked about it. This is all has to do with AI, with surveillance, with control, with even controlling your thoughts and your actions. And I have to be careful how I say things, because I had a video taken down for saying something very similar to that. So I'm cautious. Not because I'm afraid, but because, like doing this video here, this takes a lot of effort. I mean, I'm not technically savvy, okay? If you saw what I go through to get these things ready, you'd say, you're kind of like you're all thumbs, You redo something and you make a mistake and you have to go back to fix. I mean, okay? So this takes a lot of energy. Plus, as I said last night, I wear my heart on my sleeve. When I get an emotion, you'll probably see it. Okay? So it's draining. It's physically draining. And then, you have friends and family that have told me, we don't like what you're doing. We don't like you being out there doing this. You're crazy. Are you going to go shoot up someplace? I mean, they just take. I was in the military for 28 years, for crying out loud. I fire discipline. No, I was not psychoanalyzed as a schizophrenic or anything like that. It's official. Under every psychoanalysis I've ever had, I'm an OC. Obsessive compulsive. I like to have everything in its place, which is why when I do things on here, I try to get it just right. I'm obsessive compulsive. It's not a disorder, but I like everything to have a place and everything in its place, and I like to do things in order. Okay. As a matter of fact, I was so OC, and I recognized that right out the gate when I got in the military. That's when I first found out what it was. And that's one good reason to have a staff that can give you information, because if you're so OC that you only see one path or one set of circumstances, you put a staff together that can bring you alternative courses of action, that can see other things that you can't because you want things to be in an orderly status. So, just another explanation. Roy must be 22. I'm not sure where that's Roosevelt. Roy must be 22. I'm not sure what you guys are talking with each other. Let me see what else we got here. That is not a disorder. No, it isn't. There is a disorder. Being OC isn't in itself a disorder, but that's just a personality type. But you can move into a disorder. There is an OCD as well. Obsessive compulsive disorder. A lot of autistic people are in that realm. Okay, so no, I'm not in a disorder. You're right. Sandy, on the prophecy of the remnant of the house of Israel returning, that would be a lot of the Christian viewpoints. But then you have to consider what it says about the latter days. In the latter days, you will consider it when you read the prophecies in Jeremiah, Zechariah, and in Isaiah, for instance, and in Micah and Malachi. So the scriptures are circular. And I've explained that before. We in the West want to look at things like an OC does, want to look at something in linear time. We had an abomination of desolation, as explained by Daniel the prophet, in about 120, somewhere. Anyway, it was when Antiochus Epiphanes came into the Seleucid Greeks and defeated the Jews there. And he set up the temple of Zeus. That was an abomination of desolation. But we're told also that there's apparently going to be another similar thing, which is erecting an idol in a temple, be it a temple of stone or the temple of our hearts and minds. Okay? And AI fits that real well as that definition. So the point is, these things repeat to some extent. It's not always linear. Let's see, what does that say here? I don't have much control over the chat here. It seems like I can't get it to slow down. Not sure why that is. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can. Because I want to go back and see something here. Okay. Well, there was somebody's comment that I wanted to go down that road. Now I can't find it. Oh, you're saying the remnant cannot return until Russia is consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. No, who said that? See, now we're getting back to dogma and doctrine. No, I don't agree with that. Yeah, I mean, that's fine to have that opinion, but I don't see it that way. Okay, I don't see it that way. In the sense of God's Spirit being poured out upon all of His sons and daughters, that they will, in Joel, for instance, where it says it in Joel, and it says it again in the New Testament, where God will pour out His Spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions, etc., etc. Yeah, but that's Russia may be just in the dogmatic doctrine world might just be kind of like a catch-all for that type of a situation. But Russia itself, no, I don't think so. We'll see. Karen in Nevada, that's the thing. See, again, you're going back to this virgin birth thing. You got to study the Hebrew. You got to study the Greek, which is what I did last night. I brought that out, and in my Eisenman series and in my religion series on the playlists on my channel here, you can go look that up and you can see what those are. Okay, real quick, the word for virgin is Bethula. There are some others, but Bethula is the main one, and it just simply means a maiden, number one, or number two, that you have not yet had a firstborn child. In other words, when it says in Isaiah that a virgin shall conceive and you should call his name Emmanuel. Now there's some questions as to who that really is. Okay, the Jews don't look at it the same way the Christians do, but the point is, it doesn't mean that she never had sex. Quite the opposite. Okay, it just means that that whoever was born was a firstborn child of that woman. That's all it means. You're applying you're applying the concepts that were placed into Christianity by pagan apologetics, including Philo, who was actually a Jew, Philo, Epiphanius, all of those people, okay, back when they were trying to make Christ divine. The divination, that's wrong, deification of Christ, which is not what the people in the first century believed. That was all added later. Pauline Christianity was the way to make the Messianic movement, turn it into something that was opposite to what it really was, so that the Gentiles would receive it and swallow the idea of a God man. Sorry. And a lot of those God men in the pagan religions were born of virgins. You have I talked about the Vestal virgins of the Roman Empire, where the idea was really ballooned out and then became part of the Christian ethos in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, really strong. Dionysus was born of a virgin, pagan deity. That's not the way it happened historically, nor in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which mentions nothing about a virgin birth, mentions nothing about any of those things. That's why they were so important. That's why they were suppressed for so long. That's why they kept trying to move the Dead Sea Scrolls back in the Maccabean period, solely in the Maccabean period, to try to remove it from the first century events of the Herodians and James, the brother of Jesus. There was no virgin birth in the sense that you understand it. Which brings up the subject of blasphemy. Let's do that. let's get off of that for just a minute. Those are hard things to understand because we've been taught them for 2,000 years and we think it's part of the program. Okay? You can believe it if you want, but you need to research it a lot more, especially in the original languages, to understand what's going on and the history. So let's talk about blasphemy for a minute. And this is getting into some saucy stuff. It's going to go back to the emissions thing that I was talking about the other night, because I got a question on this from a friend. And I figure, well, we might as well just discuss it here tonight. I had a friend many years ago. It was a lady friend. And she had a real major problem with her husband. Her husband did not like to be in bed with her and share a conjugal relationship. He preferred to go down in the living room, you get my drift, okay, and take care of his urges on his own with whatever he was watching or whatever. So in other words, he was under the definitions of blasphemy that I gave you yesterday, which means abhor, scorn, disrespect, those kinds of ideas, scorning especially, abandonment even. When you do that, when you take care of your needs like that, separate from the needs of your spouse, be you male or female, but particularly the male, technically you are blaspheming your wife. You are committing a blasphemy against your wife, a scorn, an abhorrence, a neglect, a disrespect. You're also committing a blasphemy against yourself, and of course, the contract of marriage itself. So that would go back to the idea of a man not doing his duty of marriage to a wife, which gives her a reason for divorce. Which, after we had our talk, that's what she did. And totally justified. Because that is a form of blasphemy. Scorn, disrespect, all those things that I talked about yesterday. So when I was saying that, these emission things are not sins, well, in that situation it is. Because you have a marital covenant that you're supposed to be taking care of, and you're not. So you're blaspheming, you're against the covenant, and against your wife, and against yourself. Oh, okay, M. Allison, I appreciate that. Yeah, it needs to the video on the military getting ready and getting your houses in order, and I think we're seeing that has value, that has credibility a lot with everything that's transpiring right now. I mean, right now, for instance, whether or not they actually do it, I mean, Biden's already done an unconstitutional thing and given CDC power, right, that they shouldn't have. And now they're talking about withholding federal money. Well, he didn't say what, but I suspect it's to businesses, that don't mandate the GMI. It might even get to the point of people that are on some type of food benefit program and even pension programs. That's all criminal extortion. So it is happening. And we've seen it coming, but we've been getting these confirmations from a lot of different sources. Okay. Troy Gadboy, maca roots are good for your being. It's a cookbook. Lots of laughs. Nothing wrong with being energetic and keeping your ability up. Okay, I don't find there's nothing wrong as far as I'm concerned with maca root. I don't use it. I don't need to, and I'm not bragging. It's just a fact. I don't need stuff like that. I won't go any further. That's probably as far as I need to go. Okay. Yeah, hopefully I see DC. You're talking about becoming a physical unit because you hated what you felt for women, and I hope now you understand that's not a bad thing. It's how you use that. And I've talked about that even before I gave the lust thing the other day, and I'm not sure what Roosevelt told you, but there's a righteous use for everything, and there's an unrighteous use for everything. It's how you use it. It's what your intent is, and I talked about that before. If you don't find women attractive, if you're not, and vice versa, you'll never get together. There's nothing wrong with that feeling. It's if you try to hurt somebody else in the process. Righteousness, the love of your fellow man. Yeah, I think Roosevelt probably already explained that to you, and you can see my video from last night if you'd like. Okay. Sarah Fenton, I'm going to address you. You say, we must obey God's laws and believe in His Son. In Qumran community, in the Essene community, in the first group of Christians that came about, they were called Notzrai, which means that they were separate. Okay? They separated themselves. They stood in the holy place. They were all sons of God. Did you know that? If they followed righteousness and piety, they were considered sons of God and heirs of the promise. Just throwing that out there. Roy Potter, chat question. What does the Greeks have anything to do with Christianity? The Herodians, who ruled Palestine, Judea, under Roman control, the Romans were basically Hellenized. Okay, the Greek world was just that. It was a Roman Empire, but it was a Greek world. It was a Hellenized world. Greek Hellenized thought permeated all of the Roman Empire and much of the rest of the world, and it had to do with these pagan deities that I was telling you about. The concept of what Paul taught in the Pauline epistles. About the Christ more as a supernatural being. Now again, I just read you where James talks about he came first as a humble guy and will come in glory. But there's some other details about that which when you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, you find out what a son of God really is and what was meant by that. Okay, but at any rate, so the Greeks. The whole idea of and this is really hard on some people, but you just have to look at it historically and understand when the Messianic movement, which was very xenophobic and nationalistic, which Jesus was a part of, and James's brother and the rest of the apostles, they stood against the Hellenization of their faith, of their religion. For instance, a good example was, I just mentioned, the Greek statue that was placed by Antiochus Epiphanes into the temple during the Maccabean period. Okay, the same thing basically happened with Herod when they were making sacrifices to the Roman emperor for the Roman emperor in the temple. That would qualify as the same kind of thing. As a matter of fact, they even brought in the standards of the Roman army with Caesar's image on it. All of that's Greek-ized Hellenization, the idea of having statues and all of that, and the idea of a virgin-born Christology that would involve divine sonship. That was all Hellenized from the Dionysus, Mithras, Asclepius, and I could name a bunch of others, that Paul brought over into the Messianic movement to Hellenize it. Philo, for instance, Philo was a Jewish scholar who lived in Alexandria, Egypt at this same time. And he basically wanted to change what was then Judaism, prior to Rabbinic and Talmudic Judaism, and even during that period of time. But just before that, he wanted to Hellenize the Jewish faith so that they could more easily meld into the Greek-Roman world. Because the Messianic movement and Messianic Judaism and Judaism prior to the Council of Yavna, which was in 90 AD, they did not meld in with the Jewish world. That's what fornication actually meant. When James, for instance, is talking about fornication in Acts and in his epistle and in the Dead Sea Scrolls as the righteous teacher, and I do consider him to be that same person, and so does Eisenman. Other people disagree, but I think all the evidence is there. When he brings up the idea of fornication, he's not talking specifically about sex outside of marriage. As a matter of fact, he's not talking about that at all. He's talking about the Jewish people having fellowship, particularly sexual fellowship with foreigners, particularly Greeks and Romans. So that's what's meant by bringing the Greek ideas into the Jewish and into Christianity. And it melds, of course, into Christianity because that was the whole idea. I talked about that last night too, where Jesus is quoted as saying, if a man looks upon a woman to lust after her, he has already committed adultery in his heart. No, that's a Greek idea. Prima facie, that's a Greek idea. That's not Hebraic. It's not Israelite. And I can guarantee you Jesus didn't say that, because God looks at acts, at what you do. Certainly, in your mind, if you formulate a crime and then you start to do with intent to accomplish the different, they call them elements of a crime in criminology, you start to commit the elements to get to a place where you can actually physically commit the crime. That's different. Then you're liable. Before that, you're not. Jesus never said that. That's a Hellenized idea that Paul put in there, or somebody who wrote the Gospels. I know a lot of people don't like this. I know they don't. Oh boy. In Hebrew, Yah, Father, Yahweh, Cain, Yeshua, Abel. That's debatable. I'm not gonna say it isn't like that, but it's not. I've explained that the YHVH, what you know as Yahweh or Jehovah, is the family system. And of course, it's going to be denigrated by the opposition. And I've talked about that, and you might want to go look at it. From chat, what does it mean when the Bible says the only way to Jehovah is through Jesus? Well, yeah, what it means is you have to do righteousness and piety. Jesus means, it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's not a person. It's Yesha. They do talk about the righteous one being slain. This is before James is stoned. So they are talking about Jesus' brother, or possibly John the Baptist, but I think it is probably his brother Jesus. But it's Yesha means salvation. It's God's salvation, not an individual. Not an individual. When Jesus said, "Follow me, take my name upon you, whatever you ask in my name," and when he says in the name of mine, he's actually talking about the Jewish phrase Hashem, which is again the Tetragrammaton. But what he's saying there isn't himself. He's saying you have to do righteousness and piety. I'm going to keep nailing that. I'm going to keep hammering that every time we talk, because that's the crux of the matter. I just read it to you in Isaiah. James taught it. Jesus taught it. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, and strength. Piety. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Righteousness. Upon these two stand all the law and the prophets. James never really talked about the crucifixion and the shedding of Christ's blood and that you're saved in Jesus' blood. He never talked like that. Okay? That was a Hellenization again. It was the Greek mystery cults that had the blood communion, not the early Christians. So the salvation through Jesus is that he set the example to show you to do righteousness and piety. That you are willing to have God write his law on your heart and in your mind and do it. So if you take the name of Jesus upon you and do it. That is the path, the straight and narrow path to the throne of glory. Oh, that's interesting. Monica Austin. Roy, can marriage be established by parents agreeing? Hold on here. The man who asks the daughter's hand and couple pray out loud to break any other previous spiritual entanglement and say vows to each other valid. It's called a get. Yeah, it's called a get, G-E-T. It's usually given by... this gets complicated. I don't want to set you up for a fail here, okay? It depends on so many circumstances. I've already talked about abandonment. I've already talked about the duty of marriage, if those things aren't being done. Spiritual entanglements, you probably have to give me a little more information, but basically what it is if there is a... If the original vows were made without full disclosure, because that's even in our laws today. I talked about it last night with a lady who dresses up. She's had plastic surgery. She's got a wig. She's got dentures, but you can't tell. But then you go into her and you find out that she's not what she presented herself to be. There are ways out, and that's one of them. I'd have to have more information. I'm not a judge in Israel. God hasn't appointed me as a judge. I think if I'm anything, I'm a watchman, and I do have a fairly good understanding of history, the scriptures, and the discernment to know where there's connection and where there's a disconnection. But I'm really not a judge. Okay, so it'd really be hard for me to say. I'm just telling you, one of the things you could do, for instance, is if there is a spiritual entanglement somewhere else, a vow or whatever, get what's called a get, obtain a get, a G-E-T. That's where the person releases you. It says it in the Old Testament. It talks about if a man finds some uncleanness in the woman or whatever, or they're not compatible, and I explained that last night, he will write her a bill of divorcement. In other words, saying that she's free to go about her life with no entanglement with him. And that's called a get, a G-E-T. If you looked it up in the Hebrew, that's what it is. Okay. And the Hebrew letters there, it's a gimel, which means travel, and the basic idea is that you're set free to travel somewhere else. So it's right in the word itself. Okay. Okay. Judah is the king line. Joseph got the birthright. Yeah, but they're supposed to be in one at some point in time. Let's see, who's saying this? Blue Sky. You've got the basic idea. Remember, it said to Judah, the scepter, the rulership shall not pass from Judah, nor a lawgiver between his feet until Shiloh comes. And then Ezekiel talks about Judah and Ephraim, Joseph, that Ephraim's the birthright. It went to Joseph. Joseph lost it because of what he did in Egypt. He lost the birthright, but it was given to his youngest son, actually, Ephraim, not even Manasseh. But then in Ezekiel it says that the stick of Judah, the stick of Joseph, meaning Ephraim, will be one. So the Messiah also will be. That's what James is taught about that I just read. Okay, he came in humble origins first from Shiloh, from the Ephraim side, the suffering servant, but that he will come later as a scepter. So both of those will be brought together. Okay, does that make sense? I hope so. Oh, let's see who this is. Okay, good. How long have we been going now? Oh, almost an hour and a half. Are there any questions on what's coming up possibly this week? Oh, okay, I can do that, Roosevelt. Roosevelt's, I guess somebody's saying, please explain who is the Son of Man. Is Jesus the only child of God? Well, what do you do with where Luke says that, no, not Luke, John, or is it Luke? No, I can't remember. Anyway, says that Adam is the son of God. It gives the genealogy, says Adam who is the son of God. What do you do with that? Okay. Son of Man is a very interesting term. It came from Daniel, and it was a very messianic title. It was a title that was given to the Messiah, the messianic leaders, and it didn't apply just to Jesus. Okay, the actual concept of Son of Man, when you break it down to the Hebrew, is actually B'nai Adam. In other words, it's saying that he's the son of Adam. In other words, he's identifying his genealogy. He's not a son of the fallen angels, of the Nephilim. He's a son of Adam. And that gets into some real theological and eschatological things that are very hard for people to accept because, again, we've had 2,000 years of misdirection, deceit, power grabs, control issues by ecclesiastical institutions and individuals. So Son of Man means son of Adam. Liza Jean. Yes, we're all one family. Liza, I sent out a message to all of my mods, and I didn't have a contact with you. Do you still have, or were you ever on Twitter? I just wanted to send you. Basically, I'll just tell you what it is. So you know, you're the only one I couldn't get anything to because I didn't. I looked. I thought I had your phone number or text or something, but I can't find it. And I apologize for that because you've been around for a long time. But basically, I just let my mods know that freedom of speech is available here. The only thing that I don't want to have happen, and the only thing that we really need to take action on, is if somebody is attacking someone, using pejoratives, calling them names, being nasty, using obscenities, that kind of thing. Okay, if they're in disagreement with what I'm saying. Well, like I said earlier, you have three Jews together, you have 5 opinions. We're all going to have differences of opinion. Never on Twitter, flying under the radar. Okay, good. Well, then I got you here. Okay. I don't remember if you ever gave me. I was your first mod. Yes, you were. Yeah, I know. And that's why I was thinking. I thought I had your phone number, but I guess I never have. We'll work on that later. I've given you the message. I just wanted you to know. If they say you're drunk, I give. Oh yeah, no, that's okay. Oh no, yeah, calling me drunk. Yeah, occasionally I'll have a little cup of wine. Not wine, scotch. Oh yeah, sure. I guarantee you, I've got water today. I might have some scotch after we're done here. I was going to go out and there's a place I go to here. It's really great. It's a very. I've shown it. Suds. It's called Suds. It's in Evanston. And it's a very small pub and grill, but they do their own microbrews. And I'm not much into beer anymore. It bloats me up too much. But I'll go in there and I'll, visit with the people that are in there and, chat and, have either a little Jameson. The scotch they have is kind of sparse. But they do have Jameson there, Irish whiskey. And I'll have a shot of that usually and sit and enjoy. But I hardly ever get drunk, honestly. When people see me red or whatever, it's usually a camera problem. Like this LED light right now, it's kind of a weird color for me, unlike last night when I had good lighting. If I am partaking a little bit, I very rarely get out of control. Well, I never get out of control, put it that way. What happens to me is if I get too much, I get sleepy and I go to sleep. So, when I get angry, it's not because I've been drinking. Actually, when I drink, I get very, very mellow. So I appreciate you telling them if they accuse me of being drunk, because I am not. Okay, I'm not. I've been sick a few times. I actually did a live stream. This is a few years ago. I was really ill. I'll tell you some background story on that. I've kind of mentioned it. I got poisoned, and but I still did some streams, and I was feeling really bad, but I just felt like I had to. Actually, I had to stand up to the people that did it to me and say, you're not going to stop me. That's really why I did it, even though I wasn't feeling well. So, yeah. I hope that makes sense, Liza Jean. You're saying bye. I hope that's not to me. You got to go. I hope I didn't upset you. I guess you're talking about somebody else. I'm not sure. Liza Jean's saying bye to somebody and don't let the door hit you on the way out. I hope it's not me. I hope I didn't get you upset. So no, you telling people that they can't accuse me of being drunk. I appreciate that. That's a pejorative. Sure, yeah. Then they don't need to say that. But if they're saying, I don't like what you're saying because I believe this and I believe that, and you're a hypocrite. That's not even a pejorative in my estimation under the circumstances. I can understand people feeling that way, but if they call me, well, a real pejorative, yeah, that's probably not right. No, I sniping trolls. Yeah, I figured so, Liza Jean. Yes, you have been around a long time. You've been a great friend for a long time. Okay, like I said, we've been going for an hour and 30 minutes. I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. We are waving goodbye to Trolls Roy, who meet the definition of a troll. Thank you, Roosevelt. Appreciate that. And you and Liza Jean and Kay Smalls and Mrs. Cat and I always forget one. BP Earthwatch. I know there was a problem the other night, but hopefully we got that straightened out. But all you folks are great, and I appreciate you. Liza Jean was my first, and I do recognize that, Liza Jean. Thank you. Okay. As a matter of fact, didn't I get you from Monty? I think you were in with Monty, and that's how you got with me, and then asked to be. I think you were the first one to ask to be a mod, if I'm not mistaken. And I think Kay was the second one. I think Kay Smalls was the second one. And then Roosevelt's in there somewhere too. So, and then Mrs. Cat's fairly recent. I think Mrs. Cat came in about a year ago or something like that, if I remember right. Let's see. Please answers this question. It's so long that I ask that. Uh-oh. I must have missed it. Sorry, I guess I missed your question. So I didn't mean to avoid you. It's hard for me to do this and talk at the same time. Yes, and Roy, please ask Monty to unblock Liza Jean Williams. Oh, okay. Yeah. Alrighty. Yeah. Okay. I think we probably ought to be done for the night. I'm going to go ahead and go. Again, I know that some of this subject matter is very troubling. It goes against, what you've been told by those who have an agenda, and the agenda is very old, and a lot of it's innocent. Sometimes we carry on some of these ideas innocently, but eventually, when we're faced with the evidence, we need to be mature and admit what we've been fooled with. And I'm not telling you have to believe anything that I say. Certainly, I'm wrong, on things every once in a while. Sure, I am, but I give the very best summation evidence that I can. And I personally think that, especially in the realm of the Dead Sea Scrolls, of what happened in the Messianic movement in the first century, the development of Christianity into a pagan religion, basically, the consumption of blood, whether imitated or real, was looked at very badly in the first century by the early Christians. They didn't harp on that. They harped on righteousness and piety. That's what they harped on, not the consumption of blood. I talked about in the Eisenman series about what Damascus meant, the cup of blood, meaning where the royal seed was, where the royal line was, and also the concept of the new covenant in the land of Damascus, meaning that not well. Anyway, I better not get down too far down that road today, but just to say that I know these things are concerning because they're not going along with what you've been told for your whole lives and actually for many centuries. But the evidence is overwhelming, and again, the Dead Sea Scrolls are very much the key to understanding what really happened, and that's why the Bibliothèque and the Nationale and the École Nationale and the Israeli Antiquities Authorities and even the Roman Church and all these people tried to push all that back into the Maccabean period rather than realizing that some of the most damning information was in the Herodian period. They didn't want that there, so they had to push it back. And they suppressed it for a long time until Eisenman sued them and got it public. And he's my hero for that reason. Okay, so I know these things are difficult. I don't expect everybody to just gobble it up and swallow it, and hook, line, and sinker. What I want you to do is I want to whet your appetite so you find out for yourself. It's like I said the other night, another person's experience is not something you're responsible for. Just because they tell you that they think something is true, that's not true for you. You have to have your own experience. The experience of even the Apostle James in the 1st century A.D., and his testimony, you're under no obligation to believe it. You're under an obligation to find out for yourself, to get your own experience, and to punch the tickets that will get you there. And what are they? The 2 most important ones. Can anybody tell me what the 2 most important things that we need to do are? Can somebody say it? I repeat it time and time again. And it's not that case. What are you doing here? What are you doing here, C Delta ES? Now, I know we threw you off once before. I'm not going to do it tonight. I have had you thrown off before. Yeah, righteousness and piety. That's right, Lady M. Righteousness and piety. And Walter, yes, piety and righteousness. Those are the key. Those are the straight and narrow path. Believing in Jesus is doing that. The name Jesus is righteousness and piety. That's salvation. Okay? And I read it to you in Isaiah tonight, too. All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'll go ahead and go. Let's see here. I got a little problem. I got to fix this. Right there. Okay. And not sure when I'll be up next. The next time I'll probably be on my phone. I don't know if I'll be able to do this. Pray, stay out of the way. Absolutely, Liza Jean. Thank you very much. Watch what happens. All these different things are converging. They want to destroy us, ladies and gentlemen. They want to lock us up. They want to go back to a feudal system and then start eliminating us. So be aware of what we're really facing here. And pray for those 2 things. Deliverance and a place of refuge. Okay? All right. Out here for now. Thanks to everybody. Thanks, mods, for your help. And we'll see you next time. Bye.